Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Breaking the Habit. Today we're going to talk about character defects. Coincidentally, it is the fourth step. Yesterday we covered the third step. And generally, in terms of recovery, reaching step 4 is quite a milestone. Sorry, can you just pass me that book there, please? Reaching step 4 is quite a milestone in recovery, simply because this is where the hard work really starts, right? Previously, it's more like, in our minds, and it's a little bit more theoretical, a little bit more spiritual. It's a little bit more about doing some internal shifting of how we see the world and where we trust and that kind of thing. But those are all key foundational pieces. Step 4, though, is where just to read it out to you. We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So here we start to get into, in more detail, what our character defects are, because that's ultimately what you end up with here at the end of step 4, is a list of character defects. Right, but we'll go through it. So just to give you a little bit of insight, and I've got a lap full of books here, and I might seem a little bit all over the place today, but simply because this topic is just so rich. We have so much content, especially as Muslims. SubhanAllah, we've got scholars who've written extensively on the topic, and so we really are rich in this regard. So in taking the fourth step, we begin to know ourselves for who we really are. Building on the foundation of the first 3 steps, we take stock of the feelings and patterns that have shaped our lives. Right. So remember, in step 1, we looked at what is our history, what's our past, what are the consequences we suffered, what were our behaviors, etc. Right. We came to realize that our addiction is more than just unmanageable, and insert whatever addictive behavior. So it's unmanageable sexual or gambling or eating or whatever behavior, right? It includes an entire system of underlying thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. If we neglect this inventory, we risk being stuck in our old habits and mistaken beliefs, and our unexamined defects of character will eventually lead us to relapse, right? In part because if you take a simple thing like resentment, if we don't ever consider the resentments that we hold and who we hold it against, and how it makes us feel, and why we feel it, why we keep going back to it, then as much as we may want to recover, as much as we may attend meetings, etc., chances are that at some point this is just going to hit us in a way that that causes us to relapse, because and I've mentioned it before, there's like an old joke in 12-step meetings, which is, what does it take to start the 12-step meeting? And they say two people with a shared resentment, because more often than not, that's the key underlying or the common factor between addicts, is that generally we bear resentment. So a simple thing like resentment, if it goes unexamined, chances are we will relapse, because it'll surface. Right. So by looking honestly, this is the action that we're now taking. By looking honestly at our moral nature, the failings that kept us trapped in our addiction, as well as our virtues and aspirations, we start to move away from being self-centered and toward being God-centered. So that's important. This isn't just about looking at the things we did wrong. And more often than not, it's going to be easier, especially for us as addicts and with low self-esteem and shame and all of those kinds of things. It's going to be easier for us to identify the negatives, so to say, right? So, it's while it may be hard to accept, it's still easier for us to spot that we are narcissistic or manipulative or selfish, or like emotionally unavailable or whatever, right? There's any number of things that we can list there, right? But then to start listing some good aspects of our character is it's a little bit challenging, because it's so easy to brush over it as, anyone would do it, right? So there may be parts of us that are really generous, right, or even like really loving, but we might chalk it up to, but it's family. You have to love family, so there's nothing special about the fact that I'm being loving. Or if I'm being generous, then but I haven't, so like, why not give? Like, we can chalk it up to so many things. Just call it normal. Just dismiss it completely. Like, oh my God, what is $10? Like, fine, I gave $10, but what is that? Like, it's not going to make a difference in anyone's life, And so we minimize sort of the good as well, and all of that is part of how we maintain that low self-esteem, right? The fourth step takes courage, because we are gradually giving up our old rationalizations, the dishonesty and self-pity, in order to discover the truth about who we are. In this process, most of us find ourselves peeling away many layers of denial. So you might find that, and this is the nature of the 12-step program, like once you reach step 12, you just start back at step 1 again. And every time you go through it, you'll find that, there are more and more things that you uncover, right? Like the layers, there'll be more and more layers to discover. Our distorted view of ourselves led us to avoid responsibility for our actions. Our denial about our addictive behavior prevented us from seeing our faults. At the same time, our belief that we were horrible people kept us from believing we could ever change or be deserving of a better life. In taking the fourth step, we become willing to challenge these old ways of thinking and examine ourselves with a new clarity. Right. A searching and fearless moral inventory is one of the means by which we open ourselves to the care and healing of our higher power. It is one of the first and most profound ways we put our third step decision into action. Remember, the third step was about handing our will and our lives over to the care of our higher power. So it's one of the first and most profound ways we put that step into action. As we work step 4, we practice honesty, courage, and faith, keeping in mind that others have walked this path before us and have found their recovery strengthened through this work. So just one last point here from this book. A moral inventory can be described as a systematic examination of all the beliefs, feelings, attitudes, and actions that have shaped our lives from our earliest years. Right. So this isn't just about an inventory of what is so currently for us. Right. This can go like all the way back. An inventory allows us. It is a careful survey of how we have responded to people, circumstances, and the world around us. Now, the word response here is key, because ultimately our character is going to show through how we respond to things, and this and why we're looking at the moral inventory relative to our earliest memories is because just because we've grown up, it doesn't mean that we've necessarily let go of the hurt, the trauma, the abuse, etc., from way back when, right? I was speaking to a client yesterday, and he mentioned that his mother used to call him. I won't mention the name, but basically his mother gave him like a derogatory nickname, right? The reference point for this nickname was, maybe 20 years ago, if not longer, right? Maybe even 25 years ago. And till today, he's still referencing it. It still affects him, right? Now, if we look at, and I'm just going to show you the mechanics of how this works, right? So he could use that memory and respond to it with hurt, anger, outrage, resentment, and so use it as a foundation to tell himself or justify to himself why he shouldn't trust his mother, and why he should cut his mother off, and why he deserves just a little bit of joy and taking solace in whatever drug of choice or behavior of choice he engages in, right? Or he could use that same memory and possibly with a reframe respond to it differently. So he could say, you know what, perhaps my mother called me that thing because she knew it would upset me and didn't really intend to hurt me, but rather intended to motivate me so that it would change my behavior, right? And so it was perhaps a misguided attempt at parenting or a misguided attempt at motivation, right? And so I could see my mother as, slightly misguided in action, but perhaps pure in her intention. And so from that, I could perhaps even like feel love and understanding and, so what's the opposite of neglect? Being cared for, because on one hand you could see it as she cared enough, right, to comment, right? And I'm not saying this to excuse bad behavior or abusive language or anything like that, right? There is though, and the line here is really grey, right? Times when people just have completely misguided attempts at trying to assist us, right? And if we keep going to it's hurtful or it's abusive or whatever, then we miss that, right? So as a result of it, he could continue his relationship with his mother. He could even work on building his relationship. He could, think about how can I be extra caring or extra considerate or show additional gratitude for her suffering, her efforts, etc., etc., right? So looking at how we respond to people, circumstances, and the world around us. An inventory allows us to go over our lives methodically and objectively, re-evaluating assumptions, beliefs, and feelings that we've held onto for years, but perhaps never examined or questioned. Right? Again, we've lived our lives a certain way for 5, 10, 15, 20, perhaps even longer. Right? And so it made sense to us. Yes, we suffered, but it made sense to us. We were able to navigate the world a certain way because of the beliefs that we held. Now, the work or the journey requires for us to re-examine our beliefs. And this can be very, very challenging, but not impossible. So, we re-examine those beliefs and feelings that we've, perhaps never even questioned. In making this inventory, we take special care to identify those aspects of our character that have caused harm to ourselves and others, so as to bring them forward for healing and change in later steps. Right. So the other thing to bear in mind here is that right now, no one's asking you to change. The work here is simply creating awareness at this point. Step 4 is making a searching and fearless moral inventory. Just drawing up the list. This is a written step. This isn't a mental thing, right? So that's really all it's asking of you, is to write down, some of the things that that would fall into this category. So I'm going to switch to the gentle path that we've been referencing to show you what what some of the questions are that you can ask yourself around this, right? And then I'll switch to another book. So before we get started, and we've mentioned this several times before as well, the idea of intention, right? Looking at intention. And even in The Gentle Path by Patrick Kant, he speaks about examining first, before taking the step, the reason for doing the step, right? There are several reasons for doing this step. First, the 4th step is an awesome task and easy to put off. So that's one thing, right? Is you want to make progress, and so you're doing the step because it's the next step in a series of steps, right? By making an appointment, you make a commitment to get the task done. Even if you have to reset the appointment, the focus will be on getting the step done. Second, the person who will hear this, right, may have some suggestions for you to help you in your process, right? And finally, you know for sure that someone will be there for you when the path becomes difficult and painful. Again, do not forget to involve your other guides in this process as well. You do the task yourself, but you don't have to be alone. Each section will generate feelings. You do not have to wait to share them. Talk about them as they stir, not after you have figured them out. So it speaks about sharing this with someone else, right? But that comes at a later point. Right now, the reason for doing the step is to understand yourself. But in having said that, again, we also still struggle with potentially, some of the effects of the addictive thinking and the impaired, mental functioning. And so there are parts of this that we may not be able to understand. There are parts of it we may not be able to see clearly. Like, for instance, we may find it hard to understand how we are being abusive or dominant, right? Let's just say someone says to us, you're always, you're so controlling and you just want to dominate, right? And so, like, no, that's not consistent with the story we have about ourselves. How do I dominate? I'm always nice, I'm always this, I'm always that, right? But through being open to receiving feedback, we may understand and learn, how might this be true? So, for instance, if you spoke to a professional, they might tell you about, how various acts that can seem just, easy to brush off. It's like innocuous, but can in fact be dominant. If you take late coming as an example, right? Late coming is a great example of a show of dominance, because whether you intend to or not, the reality is that whoever it is that you were meant to meet, whatever it is that you were meant to do, right? And I say I'm using meet and do because obviously late coming means that you had a commitment, right? That person or project can't move forward without your involvement, right? Potentially it's going to cost them more to, even if they do continue without you, now have to catch you up to speed and that kind of thing, right? There are very few cases where your late coming affects only you, right? If you have like a really teeny tiny, level of involvement or control, like let's say, in a lecture theater of 200-300 students, you come late, that's less consequential on others, because it's not like the professor is going to wait for all 300 students to show up, right? He's going to teach whether you're there or not, right? But if it's a friend waiting to meet you for coffee, or your family waiting on you at a function or whatever, right? They have no choice but to wait, right? Or not they have no choice but to wait, but more than likely they're going to wait for you. And the cost of it means that everyone there now has spent time and energy just waiting on you. Like, that's, you've dominated, right? Another version of it is, for instance, not allowing anyone to do things for you, right? So like the whole idea of, taking the idea of, there's no such thing as a free lunch, but to the extreme. So whenever you go out, you're the one that pays for everyone, right? And not necessarily as an act of generosity, but more because you don't ever want to feel indebted to others, right? And so what happens though is you end up creating an environment where others may constantly feel indebted to you and less than relative to you, right? So these kinds of things aren't necessarily going to be at the top of your mind, but through discussion and through exploration and through talking about, what might my character defects be with your friends, your family, your therapist, whatever, most people will be able to give you some sort of insight into where you have a blind spot. And then again, just a key to remember here is that when making this searching and fearless moral inventory, we're not only looking at the bad, we're looking at the good as well. Because when we talk about flushing addiction out of our lives and moving to a life of sobriety, it actually requires for us to build on the good. But if we don't recognize it, then the journey ahead is going to seem, like near impossible, because, oh my God, I'm such a terrible person. How am I going to, develop these characteristics? How am I going to get there? Look at where I am, and especially when we're like really rock bottom, and when we've really taken advantage of others and hurt others and stole and lied and cheated and those kinds of things. It's hard to believe that there's even like a good bone in our body, but the reality is that more than likely there is. Right? It's just perhaps not the most dominant thing, right, or the most prevalent thing. So what we can do is by taking this inventory and acknowledging the good, it gives us a foundation to work on, and simply a matter of us then amplifying the good that is already there. Right? We can bring in other things as well, but as a beginning, we simply amplify what we have. Right. So. Another note on this thing is that this step can be very demanding, very emotionally draining, because to confront some of these truths are very challenging, and in asking someone about them, it may bring up lots of uncomfortable conversations and uncomfortable feelings and that kind of thing. So remember to take gentleness breaks. Remember to practice self-care throughout this. Just because you might not feel like you're worthy of, taking a break, or worthy of love, or worther of some sort of care and compassion, doesn't mean you should stop doing those things that amount to self-care. So we discussed self-care in one of the earlier videos. If you missed it, feel free to go back and check it out. Right. So the way to do the inventory is to go through some sort of broad stroke areas by acknowledging again both the good and the bad. Right. So, for instance, if we look simply at taking responsibility for our lives, right, then you can make a list of or make a list giving specific examples, answering the question, how have I avoided taking responsibility for my behavior? And you can list, like, I'd say go for maybe 20, 25 examples, right? So I avoid taking responsibility for my behavior by, you can start with small things like, not washing the dishes, not, cleaning my clothes, not cleaning my car, not paying for things in the house, not sharing expenses, not paying for things that I'm actually liable for. So, for instance, again, in Islam, a husband has certain responsibilities to provide for his family, so roof over the head and food on the table and that kind of thing. It's like the husband's responsibility, and so often that goes, unmet. Those needs go unmet, and that responsibility goes unfulfilled, rather. So we can give examples of where we're not taking responsibility for our lives, or where we're avoiding responsibility, right? And this can be even, where we think that someone else should come help us. So for instance, and you see this a little bit more with entrepreneurs, right? So an entrepreneur generally has to be, everything in his company, or not, doesn't have to be, but may think that he has to be, or she has to be everything in the company. They have to do the marketing, the sales, the accounting, the bookkeeping, the financing, the all of it, right? The buying, the production, the selling, all of it. And so they may, request of the immediate family to assist them, right? So let's say your wife's an accountant or bookkeeper or something, then you may say, hey, will you help me with my books, will you help me with my taxes, will you help with whatever, right? And so if that person now doesn't necessarily step up, we may think that, oh yeah, no, but this will get done when they, and so now it's on them to make this happen. It's not on them to make it happen. If you see someone that you've asked for assistance not assisting you, you still bear the responsibility of completing the task, right? So if someone's not doing it, then you need to find someone else, right? You need to make that happen. So where you avoiding responsibility and where you are taking responsibility, right? So you may be avoiding your taxes and you may be avoiding the cooking and the cleaning, but you may be very present with taking care of your kids, for example, right? And so don't overlook it. Then when it comes to and now it's starting to drop into sort of the more the various characters, right? If you think about anger, right? So anger can in some cases be empowering, but in a lot of cases it can be misused, right? So if we ask ourselves, have I held onto anger so that I could, for instance, stay emotionally connected to someone, or so that I can avoid losing emotionally, or so that I can justify my addiction, right? In what ways have I misused my anger? So there was a guy shared a story once, and he says that his dad every now and again would have this massive blowout, maybe like just twice a year, but have an absolute blowout where you just like smash everything, and his mom would just be like completely shocked and traumatized and not understand what was happening. And so he says that his dad says to him one day, I do it to keep things interesting, so that she never becomes complacent, making a reference to the mother, right? And so there's an example of someone who uses their anger really to keep someone else on their toes. And you see it all the time, like in businesses, bosses shouting at their employees because they want to maintain control, keep them in a state of fear and panic and that kind of thing, because they think it keeps them productive, right? It's a very old school method of leading, right? So yeah, however, I misused my anger. And then the flip side of that, in what ways have I been respectful and assertive with my anger, right? So here, and anger is sometimes one of those things where we try to justify it. We may say, no, but it's okay to feel angry in this regard and that regard, right? But in part, we want to, again, consider, especially from a spiritual point of view, how does this affect our soul? And so, from an Islamic point of view, we speak about anger, as, and if we look at the example of the Prophet ﷺ, that he got angry for the sake of Allah. He got angry when people were transgressing the bounds of Sharia. He got angry when people were perpetuating disobedience to Allah. So you can, if you're going to get angry, then you can look at that as, how can I put my anger to good use? Or if I'm going to be angry about something, then is it something that would still earn the pleasure of Allah, right? Not just trying to find a reason why we can, like a justifiable reason for why we can get angry with our loved ones or those around us. Then there's fear. Fear is a common emotion that we experience, and one that a lot of our decisions hinge on, right? So in what ways have I compromised myself by being stuck in fear? So if you think about an addict having to face up to financial, like let's say he's falling behind with his finances, like he's in debt or his taxes are behind or whatever, and so this creates all sorts of anxiety and fear of, oh my gosh, what if I get arrested, or what if I have to pay a fine, what if I, any number of things, right? And so use it as an excuse to act out in the moment, to abate that fear, right? But it's really just a version of how we compromise ourselves. And then on the flip side, right, we can look at when have I listened to my fear appropriately? So fear, much like any of our other emotions, are really just sending a message to us. So if we feel fearful about something, then, if we think about the advices of Imam al-Haddad that we shared yesterday, which was to shock the self into taking action, into obedience through fear, through reminding it of Allah's majesty and His punishment, and the punishment that awaits certain actions and that kind of thing. That fear can be a very useful tool. So whenever I listen to my fear appropriately, right? Then using risk. Sometimes the risks that we take that are self-sabotaging, right? So getting into high-risk relationships, or engaging in increasingly risky behavior to get our kicks. So, for instance, someone who is addicted to substances may go into dodgy areas to buy their product, right? Or someone who is compulsively sexual may engage in risky behavior, such as choking, or sexual acts in public, or sex with strangers, or that kind of thing. Or someone that gambles may make bets that threaten their livelihood, or their house, or their family's well-being. And so that's a risk that is self-sabotaging or self-destructive. And then you have, on the flip side, healthy risk. For instance, you may take a risk starting a business, right? After careful consideration, I've looked at the pros and cons, and so I hereby take this risk. And one of the things to consider is that even in Islamic practices of business, they speak about how there should be an element of risk, right? And so it's not a foreign concept to Muslims. It's also in Islam, there's also a for when we can't tell whether we're being self-sabotaging, or if the risk is healthy, there's also a solution for it, which is istikhara, right? And mashura. So if there is something that you want to do that you feel is like, no, this is like a risky, should I proceed, shouldn't I proceed, then we can ask others, right? So we can be better educated, we can get various perspectives and opinions and that kind of thing. But ultimately the decision still lies with us, right? And so with that, we can still make istikhara and ask for guidance from Allah, and then based on that, we can now decide whether we want to take that risk or not, right? Sometimes not engaging in the risk can also be self-sabotaging. So someone is in an abusive relationship, whether romantically or in their career, sticking around in a job for too long, and so that is another version of self-sabotage, because now they're not necessarily going for what they want or for what they need, but they're just avoiding the risk. Then shame can be disgracing, and it can put us in like a perpetual pattern, so we don't feel good about ourselves, and then we want to feel a little bit better, so we take something to make us feel better, we do something to make us feel better, usually our addictive behavior. But then, once the high wears off, it's like, oh God, I can't believe I did that. And so now, we're back in shame, right? And so it becomes a vicious cycle. On the flip side, there's discretion that we can apply. So we may feel shameful about certain things, but we can consider, okay, wait, should I actually feel shameful over here? Have I done anything to jeopardize my character, or is this simply a healthy version of understanding, whether this behavior is aligned to my best interest, to the interest of others? So we could use shame as a barometer even for how to engage in healthier behavior. Right. It can also be like a springboard for, again, shameful events, further shameful events. Like there's this thing called abstinence violation effect, which is that, let's say you set a boundary. So you tell yourself, okay, I'm not going to watch pornography, or I'm not going to smoke weed, right? Starting today, this is the end. And then, for whatever reason, you fall back into it, right? But like maybe you hang out with a friend and they smoking, and so they pass a joint around and you take a puff, right? And so now you've taken a puff and you're like, oh my God, I said I was going to quit, right? And then in that moment, you have a choice, right? And the abstinence violation effect, the way that works is we go, you know what, in for a penny, in for a pound, I might as well. And so you end up smoking the rest of the joint. Or you've watched a little bit of porn, caught yourself, gone, oh my God, what am I doing? No. And then you say, you know what, I've already looked, so I might as well. Or, you fall into zina, for instance, and then you think, oh God, this should never happen again. I don't ever want this to happen again. But then it happens one more time. And then you know what the heck, I might as well just continue, right? So that idea that shame can really cause sort of an ongoing cycle, whereas you could also use it as a springboard for where to grow your beliefs of worthiness and your learnings. So if you think about why do I feel shameful? And so you reflect on, okay, well, because I lead a double life. But for the last 6 months, I haven't actually led a double life. I've been honest, and I've been living with integrity, and I've been open, etc., etc., etc. And so, yeah, I actually, have been I'm just going to put the word good in here, but you could be like, I'm a reliable person, or I'm a trustworthy person, or I'm, worthy of love. And so, insert any of those things there. So again, I'm mentioning these things: responsibility for self, anger, fear, risk, shame. There's another one, sadness, and that speaks to either there's unresolved grief, which is where we just let our grief run us, and so we've lost a family member or a loved one, or experienced whatever grief we've experienced, loss of a job even, and just constantly use that to fuel our addiction. Or on the other side of it, we can learn from it. Why did it mean so much to us? What could we have done differently? Could we be, for instance, celebrating? And this is like a beautiful example. If you look at the in Tarim, they so often celebrate the lives of the scholars who've passed away, right? And so it's not that they don't drown in the sorrow of it, but rather they celebrate the life of that scholar, and they share stories about the scholar, and they practice upon that scholar's teachings, and they recite that scholar's litanies, and they keep that scholar's legacy alive through their actions, right? And so there's a celebration and the learning that comes from their grief and their sadness, so as to, let's keep this person alive through this, not let's allowing ourselves to fall apart. So let's just check how we're doing for time. So we got like 2 more minutes or so. So I went through the some of the 12-step approach to it. But in terms of if you're looking for some Islamic literature, DTI has 2 publications. The first is the Clarification of Noble Character, and the second is The Quest for Virtuous Character. Clarification of Noble Character is by Habib Umar bin Hafid, and The Quest for Virtuous Character is by Habib Muhammad Abdullah al-Haddar, Muhammad bin Abdullah al-Haddar. And I just want to read one or two things from this book, so that we can draw some of the barakah of this great sheikh. He mentions that, I'm just looking for the spot here. So generally when character is spoken about in Islam, it's made a reference to as like the inner self, right? As opposed to like our outward appearance. So often character is juxtaposed against that. So you have your physical form and then your character. And there are several hadith that support this. The idea that there's a hadith, for instance, that Allah doesn't look to our bodies like in judgment of us. He doesn't look to our bodies, but rather He looks to our hearts and our actions, right? And then they mention that if someone's external features are unpleasant, then all it says is that he's physically unattractive. But if someone's internal character is unpleasant, then that can even affect how people experience you physically. Like they'll just be turned away, they'll be turned off from you, they'll want to turn away from you because of how you conduct yourself, right? They mention in this book again the whole idea that the struggle against the self is a jihad, and it's the greater jihad of the 2 types of jihad. The smaller one being, as we more commonly know it, a jihad in battle, right? There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, who says that the warrior is he who struggles against his lower self in order to obey Allah, right? And another hadith, good character is half of the religion, right? The most perfect, another one, the most perfect of Muslims in faith is he who has the best character, and the best of you is the one who is best to his women folk, right? And so there are a number of hadith here that support this this idea that we should be moving towards acts that support a nurturing of good character. And so just in terms of how this might play out, right? Here's a couple of things that we could implement immediately, and especially now in the month of Ramadan. It's a great opportunity for us to act upon these, and we also that Allah grant us the opening to understand how to implement this, and more than just the opening, the consistency to continue to implement it in our lives. So some of the scholars have summarized signs of good character as follows: a high degree of modesty, not causing harm to others. This is like a key recovery principle as well. Do no harm, right? So whether or not you think or you're still entertaining the idea of should you, shouldn't you, if at any point your behavior is going to harm others, then do no harm, right? Righteousness, speaking the truth, and this is something we can practice every day, even in how we joke, or like right now, the spread of information, like as realistic or convincing as a message may seem, if you don't know that message to be true, don't share it. As eager as you are to assist others, don't share it. Speaking minimally, working hard, making few errors, avoiding excessiveness, being dutiful and respectful towards our parents, maintaining ties with kin, preserving your own dignity, being patient, being thankful and appreciative. Yeah, patience is like also a big one right now, because you have people queuing in lines outside the supermarkets, and just things generally moving slower than usual. A lot of businesses aren't opening or functioning fully, and so things that we may want done aren't necessarily happening as fast as we wanted to, with the whole COVID-19 and lockdown. Then being thankful and appreciative, another huge one. We nurture good character through our gratitude, having forbearance, being amicable, not insulting others, not cursing others, refraining from gossip, avoiding hastiness, not harboring malice and envy and resentment, being cheerful. This is another one that we can implement like immediately. Cheerfulness is one of those things that you can just decide on the spot. You know what? I'm in a mood, or I'm hungry, or I'm angry, or I'm whatever, but I can be cheerful. And then loving for the sake of Allah, and just as well hating for the sake of Allah, right? So that as we refine our character, if we recognize that we're falling into a behavior that would earn the displeasure of Allah, then we can hate that behavior for the sake of Allah, right? This isn't just about hating what others are doing. More specifically, it's what we are doing, right? So again, The Quest for Virtuous Character, beautiful book, chock full of gems and pearls of wisdom, available at Timbuktu or via our website. So with that, we ask that Allah grant our teachers and our scholars that have come before us, that have guided us to these beautiful advices, that Allah grant them only the best in the year after, and that He grant us openings through their teachings, and that He grant us the consistency to continue to act upon these openings, and that He make this journey easy for us, and that He grant us the courage to be honest, and the scrupulousness to be brutally honest with ourselves about our struggles. So with that, I bid you farewell till we speak again tomorrow, inshallah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.